Bernard Chapin's book, Man Going His Own Way, is an autobiographical narrative of how he went from being a gynecologist to being MGTOW. His dating and work experience with women provide the main theme as he recounts tales that many of us can relate to, the array of seemingly irrational behaviors women display that leave men bewildered and confused. To the MGTOW community, of course, there's nothing confusing about them at all. Once you understand hypergamy, there is no mystery. And so as I read his book, I found myself often giving a sympathetic chuckle. How many of us can say, if only I knew then what I know now? So by the time he concludes, we fully understand why he has gone MGTOW and why we should too. Early on, he makes an observation to which I, unfortunately, can relate: the price of being public. Says he, unlike many an internet avatar and uploader of videos whose identities are hidden, I have complete skin in the game. I'm very much alone. I use my real name online and have done so for 13 years. There is no place for me to hide. A simple Google search eliminates me from many forms of employment. He is, I assure you, speaking the truth. Over the years, I've lost jobs as well as employment opportunities for my public stand against misandry. How strange that for opposing hate, we are branded haters. So let's dive in. The present is not what I anticipated, he says, and that he expected to be married with children by this time. But, he continues, the distance between my idea of what a wife should be and the actual characteristics presented by modern women are too vast. I am now a man going his own way, or MGTOW. From this beginning, he proceeds to describe the many relationships he had and the irrationality of the women that, as with so many of us, drove him to become MGTOW. This irrationality is, of course, from the male perspective. Once you understand hypergamy and gynocentrism, the internal logic makes sense. It's the logic of the egg and the uterus, the logic of dependence. Before woman suffrage gave women the power to vote the welfare state into existence and replace men in marriage with it, hypergamy worked. But the power conferred on women by the feminist first wave has been used by the second wave and its subsequent third and fourth ripple feminists to destroy marriage and force men into virtual bondage. Freed from the constraints of the soft patriarchy of the West, gynocentrism has run amok, turning the internal logic of the egg into an existential threat against civilization that we see manifest in the often childish and erratic behaviors of women in the West. Gynocentrism, with its inherent misandry, he writes, has become the religion of the Western world. What do we owe women, he asks? There is an easy answer: everything. He doesn't mean that we actually do, but that the internal logic of the egg, unfettered by pre-feminist constraints, demands everything. And the law supports them as they casually destroy the lives of men and the very institutions upon which our civilization is built. We used to be admonished that it was a woman's prerogative to change her mind. Feminism has turned that into it's a woman's prerogative to decide she was raped hours, days, months, or even years after the event. It's a woman's prerogative to do whatever the hell she pleases and expect the man to support her actions and to expect male taxpayers to pay. Bernard describes the behavioral consequences of this in excruciating but sometimes comical detail. How young women were all over him in private but wouldn't give him the time of day in public. As bad as things were when he was a young man, they only got worse with time. Where women had at least looked and acted feminine, over the years, they got hairier, more masculine, sporting tattoos, oddly colored hair, and vulgar mouths. Continuing, he writes that dealing with the roller coaster females for the next 20 years, never fully satisfied. All the promiscuity, drugs, drinking, and laziness unnerved me. Comparing the women of his youth to those he encountered later, he continues, they were not dudes. There was no spitting, leg hair cursing, or any of the male imitation behaviors that one finds so often present in today's regressive women. MGTOW was an acquired taste, he begins in Chapter 4. It slowly arose as a result of my personal history and was augmented by information acquired in my 30s. It was the summer of 2002 that I actually started to realize that what I thought I wanted was actually an illusion. It pains me to say it now, he continues, but I wanted to find a wife. I wanted to be a father. Here he tells something that is true for many of us. While the Playboy Mansion may represent a fantasy common to most men, the mundane reality is that most of us want what Ward Cleaver had in Leave It to Beaver, or even the life had by Tom Bueller, the fictional father of Ferris Bueller. We want a reliable employment, a wife that we like and love, kids who don't hate us, and a future for them that is secure. This, of course, feminists call misogynist, and is reflected in the behavior of Western women. Writes Bernard, the more women I romanced, the less respect I had for them as a group. I realized that what I thought I wanted out of life was not what I really wanted, he continues. I was no longer sure about dating, and I did not get along with those people. I did not like them. Here begins his journey to MGTOW, which began, as it did for so many Gen Xers and Boomers, with becoming a men's rights activist. But as with so many of us, he lived as MGTOW. Now, personally, I dated several women while I was an MRA. Unlike Byrne, I was a late bloomer, and while his experiences were concentrated over a short period of time, mine were spread out. But as with so many of us, the nonsense and the demands, the playing hard to get but then growing angry when we take the hint and stop, rather than engaging in pursuit, their hot and cold running temperatures, the endless shit testing finally makes it all more trouble than it's worth. Are there women I would say I am in love with? You bet. Are there women I consider marriage material? Absolutely. But they are snatched off the market young, and even if I were to find one close to my age, the laws in this land are so anti-male that marriage would simply be out of the question. And it's not as though there are a lot of them. As Byrne writes, I am presented with a series of unappealing choices, so it is better not to buy at all. Actually, caring about them, he continues, is wholly out of place in an androgynous society. And then there are the boundary issues. He writes a whole chapter about this, and haven't we heard all of it before? Where we are concerned, there are no boundaries they do not feel free to cross, but where they are concerned, we are expected to know and respect them at all times. Zero boundaries, he writes, are another and major reason why I am a man going my own way. There seems to be no limit to what they think they are entitled to know. He concludes the chapter by observing that turning on someone for only just reasons, as opposed to trivial or phantom reasons, is a male characteristic. Females often turn on others based on a whim. Women value conformity, he writes, and will go along with whatever the herd is doing. They may bully others, he continues, out of a desire to support their friends. And I would add, to force out any who do not fully agree with them. About 6 years ago, I was required to get domestic violence counseling. When I sat down with the psychologist and counselor, it took them both less than 5 minutes to conclude that there was no domestic violence, only the in-group politics of women seeking to drive out a man who stood up to their bullying. When that happened to me, I had already taken the red pill, although it was not called that yet, back in the 1980s. And had been seasoned by many battles with far more vicious adversaries, and I only put up with it to protect the group from them. But Byrne describes how in 2002 he was still going through the red pill stages of grieving, and while he was still addicted to women, he no longer had marriage on his mind. I find that I no longer romanticize women. Nothing they do surprises me. Women, he concludes, do not trust me, and I no longer trust them. I guess that's equality, he says. I'm firmly ensconced in relationship purgatory, he writes. What is my final conclusion? What do I make of the opposite sex? This is an important question, and one that many MGTOW have addressed in various ways. I believe it's not true that we cannot live without them, he says. I am living without them just fine at the moment. If enough of us make the same decision, he continues, we will have power. The ornate sex is cognizant that they do not have much to offer the thinking man. He concludes his book with observations about political correctness and the efforts of the cultural Marxists, or postmodernists, to destroy men, especially men like us. I believe that our civilization is in massive jeopardy, he writes. PC is utter hogwash. It's psychobabble. Our opponents are pussies and cowards. Aaron Clarey, he concludes, encouraged his readers to enjoy The Decline, which, by the way, is a good book. I will not do the same, he continues. I don't appreciate witnessing the greatest nation on earth dissolve into an acid bath of cultural Marxism and masochism. I'll never stop, he writes. I have your back. It's a good book, in my opinion. As Aaron opined in his own review, it's not for everybody, but I liked it. The personal anecdotes are often funny, but sometimes painful reminders of what so many of us went through, and he artfully covers some of the multitude of reasons that lead men, in ever-growing numbers, to go MGTOW. You can buy the book on Amazon, but I recommend going to Burns' website, maledefender.com, linked in the low bar, and click through there to give him the added boost. Please like, subscribe, and share. And remember, in the war against men and Western civilization, you're either with us or you're with Gretchen Mott Mana. There is no middle ground anymore.